This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Highball Graphics. For over 25 years, Highball Graphics has been providing high-quality decals for railroads in New England, Canada, and beyond. With over 2,000 sets in scales N through G, Highball Graphics has you and your project covered. Highball Graphics specializes in custom decal orders, serving freelance railroads worldwide. Check out their easy-to-use website at highballgraphics.com or email them at info@highballgraphics.com. Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. From trackside to roadside and wherever you'd see a sign, Scale Signs has it all. With over 1,400 offerings in N, HO, S, and O scale, Scale Signs has the largest collection of fine scale signs on the planet. Come see the details that bring your models to life on their website, scalesigns.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining us on this show, coming to us from Alberta, Canada, Rob Arsenault. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. We got connected. Listen, I've been a fan of yours for quite some time and watched you on you update your Facebook page quite often, and you've got such a flow of product going through My Trains, and it's so fun to see what the projects that you've been putting together, from some light weathering to some really heavy stuff. So a lot of fun to follow you on your Facebook page. So that's been happening for some time. And then I'm interviewing Matt Fricks, and he brings you up and he's talking about how he farms out his locomotives to you to have them weathered. And he's such a huge fan. And we talked offline, and I said, we got to get Rob on the show. So he helped make that connection, and we're here now. So we can thank Matt for that. And really, really looking forward to learning more about you, and then learning more about My Trains and the process that you go through to create these beautiful weathered locomotives.
Awesome. Well, thanks. That was quite an introduction, Ray. I really appreciate it. Yeah, Matt is a terrific guy. He's one of those customers. I always tell him, I wish I could clone you because you're so easygoing, with respect to requirements and not requiring rework very much and things like that. So yeah, I'm always excited to see what he comes up with for challenges. I do have a box or two in the basement at this moment as we speak, in fact.
All right. So he's going to be looking forward to getting those back, and perhaps by the time this airs, he'll have them back in his hand, and he'll be checking them out while he's listening to you here on the podcast.
That would be neat.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you, we talked a little bit offline about how all this got going, but I want to start way in the beginning. What got you into the hobby of model railroading?
I grew up in Prince Edward Island, Canada. Small little place. I was born in 1964. So when I was really young, like before going to grade 1, I lived probably 200 feet from the PEI Railway. So every time a train went by, which wasn't very often in PEI because it was just a branch line, I would hustle into the living room and look out the big picture window to watch at first there were GE 70 tonners on CN. And then I watched the RSC 13s for a while, which is basically a 6-axle A1A trucked RS1 variant, a Canadian variant for Canadian branch line service, 1,000 horsepower road switcher. And then by the mid-70s, we had the RSC 14s, which is an RS18 with trucks from retired RSC 24s and RSC 13s. So basically, if I could heard a whistle blowing, because there was a lot of crossings in town, I was at the window watching from, ripe old age of 3. So that's kind of where it started for me.
Yeah. So for those that may not know, Prince Edward Island, where is that located in Canada for us in the lower 48 that may be bad at Canadian geography?
Right. Canada's smallest province. It's in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and it's just north of Maine. It's just off the New England coast there.
Excellent. So you have this railroad that's near you. They're running. You pretty much remember, at least you must have gone back and done some research later to see what the kind of locomotives they were running. Because at 3, I would imagine you didn't know too much about it, but
Nope.
like you were inspired from there. Did it get you into the model railroading thing though? When you were 3, did you kind of tie together, or when did that start to happen?
From the age of 3 or 4, I started asking my parents for a train set for Christmas. And obviously, I wasn't old enough, even though I thought I was. So every year, I would go through the then Sears or the Simpsons catalogs and go straight to the train sets, when the catalog arrived in the fall. And in 1972, I was 8, and I had asked for a train set for probably 3 or 4 years at this point, and I was still optimistic that I might get one day. But my parents, my mother in particular, was acting very strangely that Christmas Eve. They couldn't take it anymore, and they ended up giving me my train Christmas Eve because they knew how excited I was and how much I wanted a train. The fact that I finally got one, I was so excited.
I bet. And to get it early on Christmas Eve, and now instead of trying to, you got that train in front of you all night. So
Yeah. I opened it. Look, I couldn't open the box, but I knew what it was, and it was a lifelike train set. It had a Canadian National F7 and a gondola and a Swift meat reefer and a Canadian National caboose and a little oval of track. It was awesome. It's all I wanted to play with on Christmas morning.
I bet. I wondered if you even got to sleep that night. Did Santa Claus come? Because you were probably up all night playing with that train set.
Well, they wouldn't let me open it, but I thought about it all night. Yeah, it was hard to get to sleep, but I knew right then and there that Christmas was going to be successful this year.
Absolutely. So 1972 was the year.
That was the year. Yeah.
So 8 years old, you have this, and so I'm assuming that you finally got to open the box up the next morning, and you're setting it up.
Oh yeah. Christmas morning, and I wanted to run them prototypical speed. Of course, my brother Steve wanted to see how fast it would go because he's one of those guys. He still is, but I wanted to run it, 10 per, because that's the way I saw trains running in PEI on the branch line, light rail branches. So it was fun. I'd never seen an F unit before because we didn't have those in PEI, but the fact that it was CN paint and zebra stripes, that was enough for me for the time.
But yeah, it was really cool to see something from there,
We've advanced our interest greatly since then.
Yeah, for sure. But oh boy, hard to top that excitement though.
I'll say.
Yeah, because you still have it, Rob. You're still thrilled about it. It's from 72 to 2023, you're still living high on that lifelike train set.
Put it this way, I can't not watch a train go by even today.
Right.
I can't look away. I don't know why I can't.
I'm one of those, I could be in a sales meeting and hear a train and I'm gone. You've lost my attention because I can hear something coming through or whatnot. I'm the same way. I get it. So 72, 8 years old, you get your first train set. Where does it go from there?
Played with that a little bit, got a little, extra parts now and then, switch for your birthday, extra cars, whatnot. And I didn't have room for a permanent layout, so I'd set it up on the kitchen floor and have my friend over, and we'd switch cars and have fun. And then, like many guys, that lasted till about grade 6 or grade 7, and then school was getting more difficult. Became more interested in the young ladies, etc., etc. So it's pretty standard. And then off to university, and then off to a military career after that. So didn't really have a whole lot of time in life to pursue the train hobby. I still bought the magazines and everything, and I still looked at the websites and whatnot, but it wasn't until I retired that I had the spare time to actually pursue the hobby like I do now.
All right, so put a year on that. When did you retire? You mentioned earlier you were in the Air Force. So when did you retire from that?
I joined the Air Force in 1986, and I retired in 2013. And I moved from my final posting, which was Winnipeg, just north of North Dakota, to Edmonton, because in a previous tour I supported aircraft that flew in Cold Lake, Alberta. So I was here for 5 years as an officer in the Air Force from 1995 through to 2000. And when I moved here, I knew this is where I wanted to live when it was all finished, when the career was finished. So when the opportunity came for a job in the oil and gas sector, I took it. So I went from Cold Lake, Alberta in 2000. I was posted to Nova Scotia, to the Annapolis Valley, to a little place called Greenwood. It's a maritime patrol base. And then in 2008, I was posted from Greenwood to Winnipeg, where I worked in engineering support, logistics, life cycle support for our aircraft there in Winnipeg. And then I finished my career at the Air Division headquarters. I was a aircraft maintenance quality system auditor. So I did that for my last 3 years before I retired in 2013 to come to Edmonton to pursue a job in oil and gas.
So all this east and west movement across Canada and during your service, where you mentioned you were kind of kept up with model railroading through the magazines and whatnot. Did you get to do any rail fanning? Because I mean, sounds like you were in quite a bit of that part of Canada.
Yeah, I've been fortunate that right around 1990, I guess, I bought my first video camera. I bought a high-8 tape recorder video camera, and then I bought a mini DV camera shortly after that. And I didn't realize the significance of having that camera and shooting video at the time. I'm more of a still shooter now, but for the decade between 1990 and 2000, which I view as one of the premium railfan times on Canadian National in my lifetime anyway, I was shooting a lot of video. So I shot a lot of video in Halifax, in New Brunswick, when I was in university, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Ontario. So I got video of RSC 14s and M420s and HR 616s and sweeps, GMD 1s down in East Coast. I mean, it was a magical time, really.
Yeah, it's great to be able to capture that too, because I mentioned multiple times throughout the podcast, when we get anybody that talks about either video or photography, and I'll talk a little bit about mine, and I'll say, I feel like I missed like the golden era. Like there was like this era that was before, but I think maybe every photographer at some point may say that, like they don't think they're capturing, but what they really are, they are capturing an era that's going to be golden to somebody.
That's true. That's true, because in 1995, when I moved to Alberta, and I was heavily into videography for that 5 years I was in Alberta, I videotaped a lot of trains on the main line here in the Wainwright subdivision between Edmonton and Winnipeg, which is the most dense traffic area in Canada, really. And I videotaped, and I got to know the crews on the local train that used to come up to Cold Lake where I lived. So once a week, a train would come up and bring aircraft fuel for the CF-18 fighter jets. And I don't remember the month, May or June, there's an exercise. I think they still run it. I don't know, but there was an exercise called Maple Flag. So it was like the Canadian equivalent of Red Flag, I suppose, where a lot of nations throughout the world would come to Cold Lake and practice their dogfighting skills and electronic warfare skills and things like that. So during that week, it's very heavy flying schedule, and every second day there was a train of jet fuel coming up. So I would record all that, and I got to know the train crews, and they actually took me for a few cab rides, and I videotaped some of that. So it was GP38-2s, GP38-2Ws, and rebuilt GP9RMs.
Nice.
And then in 1999, for the last year I was there, CN actually sold the branch to a shortline operator called Raillink, and they showed up with some high hood Jeeps and GP ex Southern Pacific GP20, and they had some really nice stuff. So really interesting stuff, as every new branch line has. So I spent some time videotaping them as well. They bought at least one of the Canadian Pacific GP35s. So it was quite an interesting power contest. Every time they come up, it was something different. So for that last year, it was really cool to videotape all those operations. And so I left in 2000, and unfortunately, at the end of 2000 or 2001, they abandoned the line and they ripped up all the tracks. So I basically recorded the last 5 years of the Bonneville and Coronado subdivisions on CN. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I'm actually
amazing.
thinking about making a YouTube channel just to put those video clips up there so people can see them, you know?
I think that'd be a great idea for sure to share that out, because you captured two eras of that line, and then obviously the final era of that line. I'm sure a lot of people would be very interested to see that, myself included, to check out your video.
And some of the stuff that's really cool is I got a cab ride one day in an RSC-14 with a crew. They took me with them for a couple of hours. That was fantastic. Awesome. And I got a cab ride with an SD40-2W crew. They saw me trackside. When I went to university, I finished my degree between 1991 and 1993 in New Brunswick. So whenever I got a bit of free time, which wasn't very much because I was studying electrical engineering, but I needed mental health breaks. So once in a while, I would take some time and I would go trackside, and the crews, they got used to seeing my vehicle and they got used to see me there with the camera, and I would say hi, talk to the conductor once in a while, and I got to know them. And then one day they just saw me there. They stopped to pick up a gondola that was supposed to be full, but it was empty. And I could hear them on the scanner calling the train master saying this gun is supposed to be empty, but it's not, or whatever. So they uncoupled. And then the conductor waved me over and he asked me if I was doing anything. And I said, no, just taking a video like always. He said, why don't you come with us for a couple hours? I said, perfect. So I've had a couple of interesting rides. He got picked up in Montreal one time by a CP crew doing a transfer onto CN. So, yeah. You can't get away with that stuff in 2023, but it was doable in the early 90s, that's for sure.
Yeah, post 9/11, that seems to all have gone away. But boy, were you lucky to have what some great opportunities you've had there. I'm sure that left quite an lasting impression on you to be able to do those things.
Oh, it was phenomenal. I got to know the crew so well on 586. That was the train that came to Coal Lake that we kind of traded off. So back in those days, that was before 911. So I could take the crew through the secure area and show them the fighter aircraft as guests. So I did that in exchange for a couple train rides. So nice. They thought it was fantastic. And they said, oh, man, you must have airplane pictures all over your wall. And I said, no. I said, do you have train pictures all over your wall? He said, hell no. I said, well, I don't either.
Here, we'll trade some pictures.
Yeah.
I'll give you some airplane pictures. Give me some train pictures. Yeah.
That's kind of the way it went. So I got some a lot of cab rides with those guys, and they would call me and say, oh, we're heading up there, or we're so far away. Meet me in Bonneville. And if you're there, when we get there, we'll stop and pick you up. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And they had a caboose on every train because they had jet fuel, and they had to monitor the cars because it was a slow branch line. So it was kind of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, not kind of fun. It sounds like it was a lot of fun. And
I spent a lot of money on fuel chasing those trains. Let me tell you that.
I bet you did. Yeah, money well spent. You could spend it on a lot worse things. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. And a buddy of mine, Frank Jolin, he's got a great smug mug. I don't know if you call it a channel or a page where he's got a lot of his own rail photographs on there. He was posted to Coal Lake with me at the same time. So we became buddies. And at 5:30 every Saturday morning, we'd be in the vehicle driving 2 hours to Wainwright to the CN main line and videotape some of the trains. It was cool, like brand new -9s, brand new CN SD75s. It was something. And a vintage CN SD40s. I mean, it was a great time to have a video camera on the CN Wainwright sub, that's for sure.
That's absolutely right. And collecting it. And one thing that you did say during that, and I want to make mention of, you talked about taking a mental break and going rail fanning. And that's the one that kind of hits home with me of, it really is, whether you're modeling or can be a mental break. But when you get trackside and, you get some good traffic or you're watching, it's just a nice escape from things, at least for me. And it seems like you kind of the same where, if school is overwhelming or whatever else,
Yep.
it's just a nice little escape to get trackside and watch some trains.
Oh, fresh air, get a burger, hear the birds, whatever. See some wildlife. And I always have a scanner, so I listen to the train conversations. Just sit in one spot, think about composing shots, just think about the future, think about what you've been up to and where things are going. It's just a time to just go slowly for a couple of hours and just think,
Oh
So
yeah.
it's good. It's a good time.
I've had some troubling times in my life, and I found myself trackside as well. With a lawn chair, I'd pull a lawn chair right up alongside with the scanner going. And, there's a place I'd liked out in Voorheesville, New York. There's a diner right across the tracks. I go over, grab breakfast, come back, sitting there and watch all the westbounds come out of Selkirk, New York. So yeah, I get that feeling. It's super, it's just a relaxing, get your mind off of things. And it's just something really appealing to that.
And I have my obligatory pile of Morning Sun hardcover books, which are fantastic to take in the car. So in between trains, you can, read all about it, more or less. It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
I have some great books on Canadian content and CN in particular, which is where my interest lies.
So is it 2013? You find yourself now in Edmonton. Now you're in the private sector.
Right.
You're obviously famous for the weathering. When do you start getting into weathering locomotives?
Pretty much immediately. I arrived here in October, and I've always liked the GMD ones from photograph. I hadn't seen them any in real life, although I did see some when I got out here. But 2013 was the time when Rapido was a new company, and they were announcing the GMD one. They were in production, so I'd ordered some of those, and I started looking at pictures of them to say, you know what, the model trains are great and the detail is great, but they don't look realistic. So I asked my friend at the local hobby shop, the guy who worked at the train department, Vaughn Ellis. I said, I want some of these GMD ones, but I don't want them to look brand new. Who can you recommend to weather them for me? And he dropped one name of a mutual friend, and I said, well, that's no good because I saw him last week, and he just told me he's not weathering for people anymore because he doesn't have any time for his own layout. So I left the hobby shop and I went to the art store and I explained the situation and what I wanted to do, remembering that in 2000, I used to do some custom painting for people. So I used to use the AccuPaints, but right around like the late 90s, early 2000s, companies were trying to formulate a water-based acrylic to use through an airbrush, but the first attempts were not very good. And I had some hard times with my airbrush. And I pretty much swore off acrylic. But when I got to the art store in 2013, they said, all those things have basically gone away, and they figured out how to formulate and how to extend the open time of paint now so it will go through an airbrush. So I reluctantly, listened to what they had to say, and I said, okay. They sold me an airbrush, and I think I was a little nervous about the various brands. I went to the hobby shop, and they had a brand called Vallejo Air, and they have the standard Vallejo. So I started to use those, and I found them to be nice paint. And to me, it was great paint too. It covers well. It's very opaque, and it's basically one coat coverage. Mm-hmm. But there was two factor. I later switched to fine art acrylic paint. There was really two factors for that. Three factors really. One is price, because I began to do a lot more weathering. So buying the smaller bottles, I found it to be very expensive. The other thing was all these model paints that you see in the hobby shop, they're what I would describe as convenience colors. The quality is there. They've got great pigment loads. They're great paint, but they're already custom mixed, which is fine if you want to take that paint right out of the bottle and spray it on your model. But if you want to custom mix your own color, you want to alter that color, you have no way of knowing what's going to happen when you introduce another color with that pre-existing convenience color. It may not do what you want it to do. For a brown, for example, you don't know what kind of orange they would have used to generate that brown, or what kind of yellow they would use, or red, or whatever, right?
Right.
So the other thing I found was when I was in the hobby shop, there weren't a lot of people buying the paint. And I thought, well, if there aren't enough modelers in the city to support the hobby shop having this paint rack, and I rely on this paint, what am I going to do if the hobby shop owner decides I can better use this retail space to sell something else? Well, I decided I would go back to the art store, talk to them to figure out how I could use professional grade fine art paint in my model trains. Now, the reason I was comfortable doing that is because from the age of about 14 or so, I taught myself how to make aviation art, because the other thing about my childhood was I lived near an Air Force base and we had some really interesting aircraft there, and I wanted to learn how to. I always drew them, but in grade 7 I actually met a guy that was an aviation artist because I went to school with his son. So I learned how to paint pictures. So from about 1977 onward, I was painting aircraft paintings, and I would get commissions the whole time I was in the Air Force to make paintings for pilots or air crew or ground crew or whatever, just sort of recording their favorite memory.
Wow.
So I had developed some knowledge in using acrylic. I'd already learned how to paint quickly because acrylic dries very quickly compared to oil paint.
Yep.
So I was already fast with mixing and fast with applying color from my days as an aviation artist, which was decades. So I just thought, well, I wonder if I can use my knowledge on paintings somehow on the model trains. And the little light came on, and I had a bit of a chat with the experts at the art store who all have art degrees. And they said, absolutely, you can do that. Because I explained my background, and they said, this is perfect. This is probably a better fit for you. Because one of the things I started to struggle with as time went on was I wanted to refine some of the color I was applying to the models. I wanted to shift the hue or the temperature a little bit. And it was very difficult because I was using the pre-mixed colors. But once I started to mix my own colors from the basics, red, yellow, blue, it became very easy for me to generate the color that I wanted. So one of the things about being a creative person and slinging paint is you have complete control over everything you do. And that's one of the reasons why I think people love model trains so much, is because it's one of those hobbies where you have complete control. I mean, you can allow someone else to have control if you want. If you allow yourself to be influenced by somebody else,
Sure.
that is a choice. But generally speaking, if you wanted to be a lone wolf modeler and say, I'm going to set up a model train in the basement, you could just go to the hobby shop. You could, consult with them, find out what you needed. They would sell you what you needed. You could build your own railroad, which is the way a lot of things were, I think, before the internet came.
Sure.
So, you've got control. So one of the things you have as a creator of fine art is control over what you want to produce, because you have a certain vision in your head. You want things to look a certain way to please you first. And it's difficult to do if you're using too many convenience colors. So I just found it was easier for me to just mix up my own. And it's so far, I mean, it's been successful. It's been good.
So what you're saying is, and just interpreting, you're talking about using, instead of, let's say they call it like a B&O blue or a whatever, right. You're using base blue, and then you're adding a base white to get like a shade of blue or a gray or a black or whatever to the blue to get where it is, versus trying to take, off the shelf and try to mix it. Cause I know I've struggled the same way. It's like, and I know nothing about mixing colors. So, I laugh because one of our earlier podcasts, we talked to Kevin Gallagher, and one thing he talked about mixing paints is you mix one, then the other, and the other. And by the end of it, you got 6 gallons of paint because you've just thrown so much different things trying to chase that color.
Well, that is one of the drawbacks of using student grade paint, because people talk all the time about using student grade paint. That is one of the very real drawbacks.
So explain that. What's student grade paint versus what you use? Let's learn a little bit about paint.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to. Acrylic paint comes in different varieties. If you go to the art store, you can buy a professional grade acrylic paint. You can buy student grade paint. And if you go to the dollar store, you can buy what they call a craft paint.
Right.
Which I wouldn't necessarily recommend putting on models. That is just my opinion, though. In fact, everything I'm saying here is just my opinion. I know there are people who use craft paint regularly on their model trains, and that is absolutely fine. But before you do that, you should probably understand some of the differences between the different types of paint. So every paint contains three components: binder, pigment, and a solvent. So when we're talking about acrylic paint, the solvent, of course, is water. The pigment comes from, it depends on the color. Some pigments, they come from grinding up flowers or plants. Some pigments come from grinding up minerals from the ground, your umbers and siennas. So, like, they have a color called bone black. That's a pigment that's made by burning bones to a fine powder and then crushing them to a fine powder, and then that's your pigment for your paint. So they put that in with binder, and you have a bone black. And the solvent, of course, is water, like I said. So one of the differences, the big difference, I think, between student grade and professional grade is the fact that the most expensive component of any paint is the pigment itself. Now, the pigment that they use in student grade is the same as the pigment they use in professional grade. They just use less of it.
Okay.
So they use fillers in student grade paint. And the filler that's most often used is calcium carbonate. So one of the things that will happen is if you use a student grade paint versus a professional paint, the paint color will shift as it dries, because the curing mechanism for acrylic paint is evaporation. So once the water leaves the paint, you've only got pigment and binder, and that's what sticks to your model.
Okay.
But because student grade paint has fillers just to fill the tube, calcium carbonate, for example, the paint will shift in color as the solvent evaporates. And that's not necessarily a problem or a big deal, but you do have to know that it happens when you're mixing paint, if you're looking for an exact shade. So what I suggest to people when they say, well, can I use student grade paint in my models? I say, absolutely. I would recommend that the optimal way to use them would be to use them straight out of the tube or bottle. Same with the craft paint. So if there's a color that you find is available as a student grade paint or as a craft paint that you like, feel free to go ahead and put that on a structure or on the layout itself. So basically, if you want to use it straight out of the tube or bottle and not mix it, that's the best approach, because you have less pigment in student grade paint, that paint does not have much tinting strength. So it makes it very difficult to mix other colors from the colors that you have in your student grade line. Whereas with a professional line, they have very high pigment loads. There's lots of pigment in there, so you'll use less, but you can mix professional grade paints together and get an all new color almost instantly, and you don't have to mix up a large volume of paint. But with student grade paint, you can find yourself mixing up a large volume of paint more than you want it, because that yellow doesn't tint the blue enough, and I'm not making my green, so I've got to use a lot of yellow. And you don't find that out until you're in it up to your neck, unfortunately. But if you're building a structure, or a little shed, or a barn, or something, you want to paint it red, sure, use the student grade paint. As long as the color right out of the tube is what you're after, sure. I mean, you could alter it a little bit. You could put a little black in it for a shade or whatever. But generally speaking, I would not use that on my high-end, expensive, locomotives and freight cars.
Well, who do you say, if somebody were to go to a shelf and be looking at paint, whether, colors, who would you say is, say, a better paint versus, you don't have to put anybody down, but if you want to say, like, what paint would you recommend if somebody were to go to the shelf and pick one out?
If they wanted, well, my knowledge base is in water-based and acrylic, because I try to stay away from oil-based paint because the solvents tend to be toxic. So that's why I'm in acrylic. I also like acrylic because it dries so quickly. Oil-based paints, the curing mechanism for acrylic paint is evaporation. Once the water evaporates, you've got nothing left but binder and pigment, and you're done. It's permanent, though, because it's plastic, of course. Generally speaking, I mean, you can get it off with alcohol, but that's got another side effect. It depends how much you put on. With oil paint, the curing mechanism is different. Oil paint does not cure through evaporation. So oil paint does not dry. It cures
Okay.
through process of oxidation, which is why sometimes oil paint takes so long to cure.
Okay.
So what I see happening a lot is people will use oil paint, but then they'll put pigment in that, like powders, and mix it in with their oil and make a bit of a paste and put it on the model. And there's nothing wrong with it, but basically they're just altering the paint chemistry. They're just adding more pigment to the paint. Or if you put an acrylic medium in pan pastel to make a little paste to make some rust, say, what you're really doing is making paint.
Okay.
So I see that a lot on online, on Instagram and Facebook. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but they do that because pigment by itself won't stick to a model because there's no binder in it. It's just dust. So that's why people use so much on a model, and that's why they have to use the dull coat, because the dull coat, the tester's dull coat that they spray on the model, actually has a very uneven surface for scattering light rays, which is why everything goes matte, because the light rays get scattered in all directions. But because it's a rough surface to scatter the light rays, the pigment goes in the holes and will sit there.
Okay.
So that's why people will have success with their pigment sticking to the model if they spray it with a matte varnish like dull coat first. But that's also why, but the pigment is just sitting there. So the pigment can fall off. So they still have to give it another top coat with something. So another coat of tester's dull coat. Now, if you're using one of these big spray cans, the problem is the air pressure is so high that it blows the pigment right off the model.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Those are some of the reasons I use paint instead of pigment. When I started out, I did use powders because it's safe. If you make a mistake, a little water, it comes right off. But when you're happy, you still have to seal that somehow. And I would seal those powders with polyurethane varnish of some sort.
Yeah.
Vallejo varnish is very good, or Tamiya, whatever. It's very good. But basically, back to your question about what I'd recommend. If you're asking me what I would recommend, what brand I would recommend people buy for as a professional grade, like a fine artist acrylic to use on their good quality models, I think I would shy away from craft paint myself because of the fillers, and the craft paint is not it's not stable to UV light. Not that that's necessarily going to be a problem in the basement, but the other thing is you'll find color differences between one batch and another of craft paint. You will not see that in a professional fine artist acrylic paint. It's the same every time, and the quality is high every time. I've never been disappointed with the tube or bottle of acrylic paint that I've purchased. So there are three brands that I think anybody who's been painting for any length of time is aware of. That is Winsor & Newton, very high quality paint. Liquitex, also very high quality paint. And I could be wrong, but I believe Liquitex actually invented acrylic paint.
Okay.
And there's a third brand that I would recommend called Golden.
Okay.
All of these brands are good. And from my personal experience, they're all intermixable because it's all pigment, water, and polyurethane binder. So you can mix them all together. So if there's a color that Winsor & Newton makes that you like, but you have Liquitex paint at home and it's all acrylic, I wouldn't have any hesitation with mixing those paints together. They're all quality paints.
Okay.
You won't go wrong.
Okay. Because I've used Winston & Newton. What I didn't, I used, I think, an oil-based version of it. And now I understand. I've learned something today, which is, I understand why it took what seems like weeks to dry because it just seemed like it just sat on the rail car. I tried to do a rust job on a covered hopper and, followed a video I saw online, and the video, I mean, his results certainly came out a lot better than mine because it's me making my first attempt at it. But then it's like, this thing's still wet. It's still wet. It's still wet. It's still wet. And like weeks later, I'm like, what's going on here? Eventually, I think it did finally, it's dried to a point when I only did one side. So now I can turn it around on my layout and not have anybody see the mess up that I made and still run the car.
Right. And you can appreciate what kind of problems that would cause me
Yeah.
as someone who does a service-based consultant who does weathering for hire. If I
Right.
used oil paint, I'd never get anything out the door.
No, you'd be
And
backed right up.
depending on how much oil paint you put on your model, you could find yourself waiting years for that to cure.
Wow.
So I'd recommend very thin layers. I mean, I'm not telling people what to do here. It's just my opinion. I know there are people out there who don't think the same way I do about it, and that's totally fine. There are people that have exceptional results with other weathering supplies, but this is just what I do, and this is just my personal opinion. You'll also find that oil paint usually dries to a very high sheen. So even if you put a rust streak on there, as soon as light hits it, it looks very glossy and glassy,
Okay.
Whereas with acrylic paint, you can put a little matte medium in the paint if you want, or you can finish it off with a matte top coat and it dulls it right down.
Okay.
The other thing I've seen people do that is chemically or physically chemically dangerous, I suppose, to the well-being of the model is they'll put some oil paint and then they'll put on some powder and then they'll put on some dull coat and then they'll do some acrylic. Like you're making a soup there. You're really playing around in the alchemy, and I don't necessarily endorse some of those ideas.
Right.
And the reason I don't is because if you're not careful and you impede the oil paint's ability to cure naturally through oxidation, and if you put a water-based product on top of oil, what will happen? And it'll happen. I mean, this is just the physics of it. It's going to happen. The water-based product will dry through evaporation. Then you'll have a little crust over top of oil. And if the oil is not oxidized and cured fully, that crust is floating. So sooner or later, that acrylic, some or all, is going to start falling off in chunks.
Ugh.
You'll have a phenomenon called crazing, whereby the moisture in the oil paint wants to go somewhere, and it'll go right through that acrylic top layer that you put on there. So that model might look good today, but there's no guarantee that weathering will not come off just by picking up the model in a week or 6 months or a year. Who knows?
Wow.
But those are dangerous experiments if you're doing it on an expensive model.
We look at paint.
I always tell people, if you're going to weather, if you're new to it, don't start on your Genesis model or your Rapido GMD1 or your Scale Trains -9. Start somewhere else. Start on a budget model. Start on a boxcar. Because if you can paint a rust streak on a boxcar, you're going to be able to do it on your locomotive. But do your practicing, experimenting on your cheap stuff.
That's what I say. If you go to a train show or something, you see some inexpensive blue boxes or something. If you want to those are the good ones to practice on and start to learn a little bit.
Even Walther's mainline, like I've weathered Walther's mainline gondolas, Soo-Line gondolas, and covered them with rust streaks and made them all ratty. And I put them online, and they sold in 30 seconds.
Yeah,
it's a Walther's mainline.
Yeah,
but it's the weathering that sold the car, which goes to prove that you don't necessarily have to spend $70, $80, $90 for a freight car.
Right.
They don't have to all be trophy pieces, show pieces, but you can make even a basic car a lot nicer with some good weathering, and you don't have to make a heavy investment in that freight car to do it. Just buy a lesser expensive car that's still nice, that's still passable, like Walther's mainline, and weather that.
For sure. Yeah, it definitely. I've seen even the same where you take an inexpensive car and like you said, just put a little work into it, and that's how you kind of got started in this, right? You said you picked up some a locomotive, was a GMD1, you said, and then
right. Yeah. In my case, I think I wanted to learn how to do something very difficult because I figured if I could learn how to do something difficult, then the other weathering I would find it to be easier. So Credit Valley Railway had announced this custom CN 1023 GMD1 with the patches on it and whatnot.
Yep.
So I figured I would try to make one of those for myself because if I could pull that off, then I felt like I could weather anything, right?
Sure.
So I guess my experience in painting fine art made me unafraid to take a chance and make a mistake.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I tell people. If you want to learn how to weather, don't be afraid to make a mistake. Get busy and start making mistakes, because every mistake is a stepping stone to competency. And if you can fall into the analysis by paralysis game, whereby you just think, what if I wreck the car? Well, I'll just tell you point blank, you're going to wreck your first car.
Yeah.
You're going to wreck your second car too. But it might look a little bit better.
Yeah.
Your third car, it'll look a little better.
Yep.
But you have to do it. You can watch YouTube videos till your eyeballs turn red, but you don't necessarily know how to weather a car. You have to do it.
Yes.
Right? And you don't want to do it on your expensive freight cars. Do it on your cheaper ones.
Absolutely.
But I make mistakes all the time. The only difference between me and somebody who's never worked on freight cars or locomotives before is I feel that I can fix my mistakes, and I can intercept the process. I can detect when I'm going in the wrong direction early, and I can stop myself, and I can make a course correction and get back on track. Whereas someone who's less experienced doesn't necessarily have that skill yet, but if you do it enough, you will.
Right.
You have to be. I mean, the earlier you find a mistake, I think you'll agree, the easier it is going to be to fix it.
Sure.
If you weather an entire locomotive and then realize, I did something wrong on the body, but it's 3 or 4 steps ago, and the only way to fix it is to take all the other stuff off that you went on top of it. It's kind of a pain in the behind, right?
Absolutely.
You want to be able to detect that problem early. And I always tell people, like, you're not really paying me for a weathering job. You're paying for 2. Because I weather it once in my head, and then I weather it in the basement.
Sure. When do you turn the corner from weathering your own models to weathering somebody else's models?
Well, in my case, it happened. I was a late bloomer, I guess. I joined Facebook in 2013 or 2014, and I found I didn't know what a group was or anything like that. And I found a group called Canadian Railway Modelers, and I posted a couple of photographs of some of my GMD1s that I'd weathered, and people really liked them. And people started to ask, hey, I've got one of these. Would you weather it for me? So, well, don't really weather for other people, but the questions kept coming. So I eventually said, sure, I'll give it a try. And it's pretty nerve-wracking, to work on someone else's locomotive for the first time.
Oh, I can imagine.
Especially something like a GMD1 where, it's limited edition and they can't necessarily replace it if you screw it up.
Right.
So it took a little nerve and a little planning, but, I did rely on my experience as a fine artist and my own self-confidence in color mixing to remind myself that you can get through it. You can power through those mistakes, because every weather job has, just like every fine art painting, it has an ugly stage where you first apply the paint and it's not finished yet.
Yeah. But
you're started, but it doesn't look very good. And a lot of people give up at the ugly stage and call it done. But you have to keep going. You have to keep working through that, being confident in your own knowledge that you'll get through that ugly stage, and it will get better as you advance that model. And it'll get better with every successive model after that.
Yeah, for sure. I can only imagine some of your clients maybe seeing that, and they're probably, if they were to see those first early steps, it might be freaking out a little bit, going, "Oh my God, what is Rob doing to my locomotive?"
Yeah. If people saw what I did to their GP40-2Ws with those brown stripes, they may or may not want to send them to me. But yeah, I'm pretty careful. I mean, I've done a lot of those. That was one of my big challenges when I first started weathering. I saw those SD40-2Ws and GP40-2Ws and 38s on CN. You know how the stripes go down a primer?
Yeah.
And how the paint chips. I said, I have no idea how to do that.
Yep.
But I am bound and determined to figure that out.
For sure.
And I will learn how to do that, because it was just so cool.
Do you ever find clients fearful of weathering a new locomotive? Like they know that they want it done, but you can just tell that they're worried about it. Cause I know, like mine, I'm like, I just have that nerve of messing it up, like you said, and you got to go through the process if you're doing it. But even if I was it's like sending it into you, do you see people still kind of nervous about that process?
Yes. From what people tell me, when they first contact me, most people will watch my posts on Facebook or Instagram or on the web page for 5 years before they even engage me.
Wow.
That's the first thing. And that is consistent. That is what happens. People watch me for 5 years. They look to see if anybody is slighted. They look to see if anybody's complaining. They look for the general comments about who people are recommending to send their models to, things like that. And everybody says the same thing. Like, I have lots of references, and I say, well, to a new customer, I'll say, what state are you in? Would you like some references? Because I have customers in most states.
Yeah.
I can link you up with somebody who can tell you about their experiences with me. But once they get through that, there's still some trepidation because I'm Canadian, eh? So most of my customer base is outside of Canada.
Yeah.
So people are nervous shipping models outside of the United States in particular. Not so much I have customers in New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Singapore, and Europe. People aren't nervous about shipping from those countries. The concern there seems to be postage price. But for some reason, a lot of new customers in the United States are nervous about the fact that they have to ship to Canada. And I do what I can to make them realize it's not really that big of a deal because they've never shipped anything out of the country before. So there's a little slip of paper you have to fill out at the post office. You have to declare what's in your shipping box, what's it worth,
Yep.
where's it going, why are you sending it there?
Yeah.
It's just your typical nosy customs agent questions, right?
Right.
That's not a big deal. I'm federally registered with Revenue Canada as a service provider, and I charge Canadian orders, goods and services tax, and harmonized sales tax. That's a federal tax. That is not applicable to foreign customers.
Okay.
The only time I would charge a foreign customer tax is if they said, ship it to my friend in British Columbia, and he's going to take it to Australia,
Okay. Gotcha.
which is what I've done before.
Sure.
Right? So what I try to convince customers of is I've been doing this for 10 years now and full-time since 2016. And the customs agents on both sides of the border have a lot of information on me because I ship to the United States probably 4 days a week or more. I've never had a package intercepted, as far as I know. I've never had a package opened, and I've never had a package delayed. I've had a couple delayed inbound, but that was before I had a customs broker. So, the customs agents are used to seeing my product as a federal, I'm a licensed importer and exporter. It's not like it's a personal shipment. I mean, this is a commercial shipment. So all my boxes have the proper paperwork. I mean, it's never a problem. And once people go through it for the first time, they say, is that all there is to it?
Yeah.
And I say, yep. And then they say, why did I wait 5 years? I say, I don't know.
Good question.
but welcome to the family.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So, at some point, you talked about Matt earlier. He took a chance. He saw what I was doing. He must have liked what he saw. So he sent me a box of cars to work on, and he's been doing it pretty regularly for several years now. So, and it's no problem. I don't think anyone complains about having to ship across the border. It's just that the first timers, right? Well, I'm just careful with them, and I do have a little document that I send to people that they can read to explain what it is they have to fill out, and my phone number and my shipping information and what to put in the customs form. And people find it's generally pretty easy. It's straightforward.
Yeah, and just like any other process that you're not aware of, and just educate yourself, you'll find it's pretty easy. I had people requesting stickers from the podcast, and they're like, being Canada, and I'd be like, oh man. And I realize it's just a global stamp. It's so easy, it's but it's like, yeah, there's that little hesitation. It seems like, for whatever reason, people think it's hard. It's not.
The main reason the Canadian government wants people to fill in paperwork, I don't know how it goes in the other direction, but the main reason people have to fill in customs paperwork is because the federal government charges, for me, because I live in Alberta, the federal government charges me 5% tax on everything that crosses the border. I have to pay tax on everything, whether I buy it or not,
Yep.
which is fine because I have a goods and services tax, harmonized sales tax account with the federal government, and I have to remit my federal tax quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for example, you send me a locomotive and you say it's worth $300.
Yep.
The customs agents, the post office can act on behalf of customs to a maximum, I think, of $2,800 for an import. So they'll look at the value of $300 US and they'll multiply that by 1.4, whatever it is at the day. So they'll say 420. And they'll say, okay, this guy owes 5% of $420. So they'll do a bit of math. They stick a piece of paper on it. And then when the box comes to Canada, either the letter carrier brings the box to my door and I have to be there with my visa to pay the tax to get the box,
Wow.
or it's held at the post office and I just go pick it up at the post office. And as soon as I pay the tax, they give me the box.
Wow.
So that tax is all recorded by my accountant and me in my accounting software. So when I have proof that I sent the box back to you in the United States and I did not, in fact, buy the locomotive from you, the Canadian government says, oh, okay, well, the tax you paid on that particular box is now a credit towards the tax you owe each quarter.
Oh, okay. So then you get it back in your quarterlies. Okay.
I get it back anyway.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get a refund. So let's say I import 20 Bowser locomotives and I sell them to 20 Americans.
Yep.
I have to pay goods and services tax of 5% on 20 locomotives to get them across the border. Mm-hmm. But if I sell them to all Americans or people outside of Canada, then all that tax is credit.
Okay.
So it goes against the tax I owe per quarter, and I usually would get a refund or something like that.
So the bottom line is, if you're looking to send something to Rob to Canada, it's not that big of a deal. And Rob's got the taxes all figured out. So that's all you got to worry about. Just send it to Rob and worry more about what you want on your weathering. So
exactly. And the most important thing is to be honest. Don't say it's a gift. Don't say it's worth, don't say your locomotive with DCC and sound is worth $20 because they know it's not.
Right.
The records are there. They know it's not worth $20. Yep. And don't say it's a gift. Say what it's actually worth. It's a cost of doing business, and I'm happy to pay that tax to have you as a customer.
You've been doing this professionally since December 2016. You were telling me that offline, and want to get to asking what is your typical workload and throughput? What do you how many are you weathering, and what's kind of your throughput?
Well, I generally weather 7 days a week. I know people think I shouldn't do that because they think I'll burn out. But when I feel tired, I will take an afternoon off. I'll go trackside, re-energize, Yep. Not a big deal. Right. It's not like it's a physically strenuous job. It can be emotionally strenuous sometimes because I do have some customers that sometimes can get a little impatient because I've had the model a little too long. But when they get the model, they say, I guess it was worth the wait,
Yeah, sure.
So that's the goal. Try and make him understand why he waited and what he's waiting for. Because these days I put more time into people's models, and I haven't raised my prices basically since I started, and I don't have any intention to do that. So in spite of the fact that my accountant is hounding me, I refuse to do it to this point anyway. But I do work 7 days a week, and depending on my energy level, I could work anywhere from 8 to 12 hours in a given work day. But, if I'm working 12 hours a day, I can't do that very long. Any more than 2 or 3 days in a row, I need a little break. And I'll take it. Because I want to make sure I don't burn out, because I don't have any plans to retire. And I want to keep doing this for the next, hopefully 20 years or more. I want to keep doing this. I'm enjoying it. And I feel like I'm getting better. I feel like I'm learning a little bit more each day. And I want that to continue. I do not want to be at the top of the heap. I do not want to be at my personal best. I want to keep chasing that target of excellence. Nobody can offer perfection, but I'm striving for excellence. That's what I'm trying to do.
Well, you certainly, boy, oh boy. And then just see, not only you're weathering them, then you do the photographs of them and you put them up on Facebook and you share them. So there's a process there. You're putting out a lot of locomotives and then, putting all that up for us to just admire others' locomotives that you've worked on. Do you have any idea, maybe a guess of how many you think you've weathered through since 2016?
I've thought about that, and I suppose I should have kept records. Somebody told me I should have kept a book to find out who's got what locomotive, but there just aren't enough hours in the day for that
Right.
kind of logistics. If I had to guess, I it would be a rough guess, and I would say somewhere between 5 and 10,000 pieces.
Wow.
I really don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, on a good day, I might get through 2 or 3 locomotives, maybe. Depends on the weathering level. If it's a light weathering, I'll get through 3 or 4. If it's a medium, I might get through 3.
Mhm.
It's a long day.
Yep.
But when Scale Trains comes out with their kick-ass, pink war bonnets, everybody thinks my work is already done, and the answer is no. It's
Yeah.
just as much work to do one of those
Yep.
as a clean red Santa Fe unit.
Right.
So those ones tend to take the better part of an entire day.
Yep.
And then oftentimes I'll have to come back. I have to leave the paint to cure overnight
Mhm.
because before I go back and do more layering. Because with acrylic can fool you into thinking that it's cured when it's not.
Okay.
So it'll feel dry to the touch, but if you're not careful, you could actually dig your fingernail into the paint and it'll leave an indent and it'll stay there. So the one thing I've learned with acrylic is you have to give it time to cure properly, and that is typically a couple of hours.
Sure.
But typically, when I'm doing one of these fade jobs, for example,
Mhm.
I call it a pumpkin to peach conversion on a BNSF unit
Right.
or one of the CN-9s. I'll go to town and do as much as I can and cover that locomotive from head to toe and just gently put it on a pony wall in the living room in room temperature air and just let it sit there overnight.
Right.
It's really important for people that do use water-based paints that if you're going to try and expedite the drying and ultimately the curing, that you do not apply heat. If you're going to use a hair dryer to dry your water-based paint, just use air. Don't use heat. If you use heat, there's a very real risk that you could create crazing. So there's like trying to put acrylic on top of oil.
Mhm.
If you use heat on wet acrylic, you'll form a thin skin on top that could impede the water from exiting the wet acrylic.
Okay.
So sooner or later, that solvent is going to find a way out of there.
Yep.
And what it's going to do is crack the top layer. Think of it like a Dairy Queen ice cream cone, with the chocolate on it.
Yep.
It's just like that. Thin layer will cure, and you'll fool yourself into thinking that you've dried it, but you haven't.
Yeah.
Because underneath that thin layer of cured paint that's got no water in it, there could still be some moisture in the paint underneath it.
Sure.
And it has to go somewhere, and it's going to break that upper crust, and that water is going to evaporate through the crack,
Wow.
which you don't want because that's crazy.
Absolutely.
So the way around that is not to use heat and to use thin amounts of paint and just let it air dry, or just use air from the straight air from the hair dryer.
What are some of your favorite weathering projects? Do you have any in mind that were like somebody sent it to you and you just got super excited about it?
I really like the tired CN striped GP38 and GP40-2Ws with the brown stripes and the primered cabs because it's such an intense project. I really like the BC Rail 6-axle GEs, -8s and -9s. And I love doing GMT1s. When I do a GMT1, it's rest. It's like putting on my slippers. I like to paint the noodle with the green or the primer brown, as they did from the oil that made the upper layer of paint fail. Mm-hmm. And they used to scrub those things with metal brushes and caustic soda to get the oil off of them. So the white noodle went down to primer or CN green pretty quickly, because of the type of paint they used and the fact that the GMT1 shot oil up the stacks every day from the day they were brand new. It was just the design of the prime mover. So I like to do that. And lately, they're difficult, but I do enjoy making the burn marks. I like the difficult stuff, the heavy jobs, because I have to think. not to solve the new problems. I like to fade locomotives like the Union Pacific Yellow.
Mm-hmm.
And, these pumpkin to peach conversions, I like to do those in spite of the fact that they're difficult.
Yeah.
Because on the BNSF units, we have these yellow pinstripes between the green and the orange.
Mm-hmm.
And those colors fade.
Right.
So I'm not real big on masking tape because maybe I'm a little ham-fisted, but the way I use tape, it causes more problems than it solves. So I will typically just load up a rigger or a script liner brush, they're called, and I'll just freehand those pinstripes. Just take a deep breath and paint the stripe.
Wow.
Yeah, I just find it easier for me that way than to try and deal with masking tape on the model, especially on uneven surfaces. It's easier to just make the paint a little wetter and paint it on by hand. Just stabilize my pinky against the model or something like that, and just go for it.
Awesome. Well, Rob, we're running short on time here, but before we leave here, I want to give you an opportunity to tell the folks out there where to find you, and then talk a little bit about the process if they were to send a locomotive or rolling stock to you. What does that look like? We talked a bit about the shipping, but let's talk about the process.
The process is pretty straightforward. Once I get initial contact from someone via Facebook Messenger or Instagram, because I'm on Facebook at Rob Arsenault, Weather My Trains. I'm on Instagram at Weather My Trains. And I have a website, weathermytrains.com. If people want to contact me, they can contact me. I think the email from the website is the best way. It's the way that's going to get my attention the fastest. But you could also send a Facebook PM or a message on Instagram. And then I've prepared a little single-page Word document with my address and some shipping instructions, which basically gives you guidance on how to pack your models, what information you should be putting on the customs form to make sure that the box is not unnecessarily intercepted by the customs agents. Be truthful, of course, but some guidance on how to put the values in, my phone number, my information, and why you're sending it here and whatnot, and packing recommendations, because I don't like it when someone's model shows up in kit form. We never want to do that. So, if it does, it's pretty hard to avoid these days with etched metal steps and things like that, walkways, to not have to repair those. So I'll repair that. Or sometimes a horn is broken off. If I have a brass one, I'll put on a cowl scale horn. So, I like to try to make it straightforward for people. So they, even if they print out the sheet, all they have to do is cut it and tape the address to the box, and it'll get to me.
That's great. Rob, I got about 100 more questions here, but we're out of time. Yeah, we're definitely gonna have to get you back here again. We'll pick up where we left off and ask you a bunch more questions on weathering. And I'm just amazed. I learned a whole bunch about paint tonight, and then some of the process, and I just look forward to seeing more of your updates on your Facebook page. We'll share all of those links in the show notes, and we'll also share them on our Facebook post when the show comes out. So as you're listening now, head to facebook.com /around the layout. You'll be able to click on all those and get right over to Weather My Trains and check out Rob's work. So Rob, I want to thank you again for being on Around the Layout.
Awesome. It's a real privilege to be here. Thanks very much, Ray. It's great to talk to you tonight.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.